My name is Nick Moench. I own Inoculum Ale Works.
Hey there, Amanda here, and welcome to episode 96 of Great Beer Adventure. Today we are going to hit up the first of two Orlando breweries, each with quite unique names. This first brewery is quite interesting as I actually met up with them at a different brewery. Confusing, right? Okay, so here's the story. My buddy, Steve Schmidt, you remember him, right, from a couple episodes back? He knew that I was coming in for the conference and found out about this bottle release for green beer, and it was happening the day I flew in. The brewery, Inoculum Ale Works, located outside of Orlando, is hoping to get into Orlando. So their buddies at 1010 Brewing hosted Inoculum's bottle release. Does that clear up the muddy waters? Well, Steve picked me up and drove me over to 1010 to chat with Nick from Inoculum and score some green beer to boot. Let's jump right into the conversation with Nick and see if it all gets cleared out.
Our production system is based out of Spring Hill, Florida, and we're actually working on building out a tap room in Orlando right now, and that'll be happening this year, and then we'll be moving production once we add a system in there and get a brewery built out in Orlando. So we're migrating this direction, certainly, which is why we're here today instead of there in the middle of nowhere. Yeah, so we're at 1010 Brewing in Orlando. It's owned by a very, very close family friend of mine, Mike Wallace, and his partner, Patrick. Mike Wallace is the brewing and production half of the ownership. He's an excellent guy. He's one of the ones that taught me how to brew on my system, and I'm very appreciative that he let us do our bottle release here and kind of get into this Orlando market. This is how we're sort of dipping our toe into Orlando's waters. Yeah.
Let's start with the origin story.
Yeah, so I left my now partner's brewery, Brooksville Brewing Company at the time. I left for a big boy corporate brewing job out at Disney, working for Craftworks, running their Big River Grill and Brewing Works, and then did that for a bit over a year, and just wasn't really happy with the corporate lifestyle. Wasn't happy with the amount of freedom I was and was not given there in terms of brewing weird and bad beers. Part of brewing good beer is brewing really bad beer. That's an important step, and I just wasn't allowed to do that. So I was looking to leave. I was looking at some other options. My partner and I, who was formerly my boss, got together. He had a defunct brewing system that wasn't being used at the time. I was one of few people in the state who can actually run it. It's a really complicated old school Belgian system. So we got together, started talking about what we wanted to do. I wanted to build a production yeast lab. That's really my passion, is the microbiology of brewing. And I wasn't really necessarily interested in selling yeast. I just wanted to work with it. So we built Inoculum with the intention of it to be a independent lab sort of funded by beer. And that's where we're at right now, and we're fleshing that out better and better every day. But Inoculum, if you get a flu shot, you're being inoculated. The vaccine that you're getting is the inoculum you're being inoculated with. When we add yeast to beer, the yeast that we're adding is the inoculum, and that's where our passion is. So that's what we named the brewery after, is the yeast, the inoculum.
Next, how about those beers?
Yeah, so this one is a weird beer. I mentioned we have a good relationship with the boys over here at 1010 Brewing in Orlando. Horace is their sort of assistant brewer and also everything else. He and I are real close pals, and we were talking one day. We were actually here talking about just stupid beers we wanted to do. An absinthe beer came up because it's probably pretty gross. It sounds gross. Absinthe is not a good flavor. And me, not being someone who backs down from a challenge, said, absolutely, I'll make that, and I'll make it good, and watch me. And here we are. So it's not necessarily reminiscent of absinthe in in a very literal way. The only complaint I've ever seen on the beer is, it doesn't even taste like absinthe. And my response is, you don't want it to taste like absinthe. No one wants that. I have to sell this stuff. I have to be able to get rid of it, right? So it has all the ingredients of absinthe, just proportioned out to be in a way that's palatable and not disgusting. So really heavy on the hyssop and lighter on the wormwood and star anise, for example. Another beer we've done is Cubico, which is a sour strawberry lemon lime ale that we do that kills it down here in Florida. That's that's one of our number one beers. And that beer was actually, I was brewing that at the time the pulse shooting was happening down here in Orlando. I was brewing real late, and then I was reading the news as it was happening, and I was working. We ended up, we didn't have a name for that beer at the time. We ended up calling it Cubico because Cubico is a Japanese god that's characterized as a scarecrow who's stuck in a field but is all-knowing. So he sees everything happening in the world but can't do anything about it, which is how I felt at the time, brewing and not being able to do anything, to help the folks in Orlando that were dealing with that hardship. So we made that beer, named it in their honor, donated their proceeds to a Pulse Victims Fund, and that beer has been killing it ever since. So the beer's green because absinthe is green, and we have to make it green to be able to do that. It has wheatgrass in it, so we process the wheatgrass, we blend it up, we hit it with liquid nitrogen to fractionate the cells to get the chlorophyll just kind of free and loose and wild, and then we centrifuge it down, and then 500 mils at a time, and we need a lot of this stuff. We pipette off one layer, the colorful layer, the one we want, the colorful clean layer, and until we get to a couple liters of that, which takes a long time, but it ends up getting a little murky, doesn't really get very bright, so we do add one other super secret all natural food coloring agent to it, which is it's a plant that I'm not sure is super prevalent in the brewing industry at the moment, but probably should be and will be very soon, I imagine.
And where can the beers be found?
So that's another story. Everything we do is complicated. I don't know why, but it's in my nature to do things the hard way, and that's what we've been doing from the start, which oftentimes is regrettable. But the way we started distribution was I saw that the draft market, that the commercial market in Florida was getting too crowded. There's 215 breweries in Florida now. That's getting to a point where you're competing with other breweries, which I don't want to do. I'm just not a competitive person. It's just not in my nature. So we started looking at the wine industry and how they sort of succeed without competing against each other very much. And one of the ways they do that was with wine clubs online. We figure sour beer is a lot closer to the wine than IPAs are, so maybe we can justify that. So we ended up going to market initially 100% online through cans. And that was difficult for a lot of reasons. Legally, the legal infrastructure is incredibly complex and expensive. The maintenance on that was massive. The logistical infrastructure was massive. The shipping was priced a little too high for cans. The price point ended up being a little too high for cans, which kind of people struggled with. But eventually, we're gonna once we open the tap room, we're gonna be getting back into our sort of wine club model and be doing some special things. And instead of being cans, it'll be primarily large format bottles. That will be good. Right now, we're draft distribution through a lot of the state. We work with a distributor whose only brand is us, so we're sort of self-service through them, and that's a whole nightmare. Everything we do is difficult. Yeah.
And finally, as always, what is Nick's first beer memory?
Oh, man. Being my dad's kid. So my dad has owned Orange Blossom Brewing Company for the last, I think, 10 years or so. Prior to that, he owned Florida's first craft beer distributorship called Unique Beers in Orlando. He was the one that brought Canyon to the state. He was the one that brought Jolly Pumpkin to the state. He was actually Ron Jeffries' first distributorship outside of his state. So he brought Jolly Pumpkin down. He brought Shipyard. My first beer memory, unfortunately, is not a pleasant one. It's probably being maybe I was 7 or 8 or something, 9 years old, and restacking pallets and pallets of Shipyard bottles in my dad's bulk cooler for his warehouse. That's, and I think you remember, maybe because I'm a negative person, I remember the negative memories more, but that's probably it. I have a nicer one I can think of as well. Nicer memory, probably second memory. I used to go around to production breweries with my dad growing up. And when you're a kid, production breweries look like yogurt factories. They're not that impressive. But I remember my dad telling me about and sort of reading about and learning about these production sour breweries out in Belgium, where they're like, if a production like American brewery is a yogurt factory to a kid, then Canyon to a kid is like Hogwarts, right? So I was like predisposed to sour beer from like childhood because I had that sort of childlike imagination for those breweries, certainly.
Thank you so much to Nick for sitting down with me and telling me all about Inoculum. You can find links to them in our show notes over at greatbeeradventure.com/podcast. I'll see you next week for a roundtable tasting filled with dad jokes. Until then, get out there and try something new. Chat soon, friend.